As I look at the world, as I look at our church, I see, which is pretty obvious, I think all of us can see, a greater and greater polarization of people. We have been divided into two groups, and liberal progressives know that there are injustices that are holding people back. And conservatives know that there are injustices that are holding people back. And what if they're both right? What if we're all right about that? And the question I want to address is it possible for the church to once again become a relevant power in society to liberate people for the glory of God? It was a year ago that I met Robert Payne, and I'm so glad you got to hear him as a worship leader. He amazes me about how adept he is in online church marketing. And you didn't even get to see one of his best skills, which is how he draws out from others in the band and in our choir, how they can be amazing. He draws the best out of them. He's also, as he mentioned, an evangelical. I wasn't familiar with the term, but as we got to talking about it, I realized, I can connect to that. See, evangelicals are evangelicals who are tired of women being kept out of the pulpit, tired of the discrimination against the LGBTQI community, and tired of churches that are refusing to allow people to ask hard questions and to have doubts. And I myself was an evangelical. I grew up as an evangelical, but now having spent about almost 40 years in the United Methodist Church, I'm pretty mainline. But in these conversations, I've discovered the evangelical church again and the ex-evangelical community. As we've been talking about it, at one point I asked him, so what is an evangelical without complementarianism, without discrimination, without judgment, without original sin, without strict literalism, and without proselytizing and converting others? And perhaps you're thinking to yourself, that's liberal, progressive, mainline Christianity. And it's not. It isn't. I've discovered this fascinating evangelical community all on their own. They're separate from mainline Christianity. They have their own conferences, their own coaches, their own networks. There's this whole community of evangelicals, and I was like, I'm not quite getting this. But as I learned more and more, what I discovered is that people are complicated. It's not so easy to just clump people into how we often, that binary of how we like to put people in, right? The good and the bad, and the left, the right, the conservatives and the liberals, and us and them. We want to clump people into two, but we know that the binary is a false dichotomy, isn't it? And I began to think about my own church experiences. I've been in, I think I counted 9 different churches in my life. And in all of them, sure, there's always some bad apples that make some mistakes and cause problems. But for the vast majority of the time, what I've discovered is that people are good. There are good people in all of our churches. And good people can disagree. In my last membership class, I was talking with a couple. They had a private conversation with me. They said, we're just going to be upfront with you. We've both worked in the oil industry, and we are conservative Republicans. Now, my church is a pretty bold, reconciling congregation. And I said, so what brought you here? And they said, we're not going to go anywhere or support any organization that doesn't accept our son. And I said, enough said. I get it. And it also reminds me that there are several people in my church who have come and talked to me in casual conversation. They said, Pastor, we want to let you know we're voting for Trump. I said, and you know what's the issue here? People are complicated. They have many different sides to themselves. And what I have found is that there are things that unite all of us. We want to do well in life. We want our families to thrive. We want our communities to thrive. We want our country to get better. And also, I have found that most people know what it's like to have somebody else tell them, shut your mouth, put your head down, and do your job. Most of us have had some experience of having our souls and our spirits sucked out of us by a job that doesn't appreciate our gifts, our skills, our unique talents. Most people in the world, I believe, have a longing and a desire to be free, to be who God created them to be. And we as a church are so uniquely positioned to address this, aren't we? Right? I mean, when we look at our scriptures from the Exodus to the exile in Babylon to the people that Jesus talked with, that throughout all of our scriptures, there's a desire to liberate the people of God, all people. To liberate. And even when we look at the life of Jesus, as Jesus was talking to people, he was trying to set them free for the kingdom of God. So he talked to men and he talked to women. He talked to Jews and Samaritans and Gentiles, those that were local and foreigners. He talked to the poor and he also talked to the rich. Jesus pretty much talked to everybody, didn't he? There's only one group that he consistently argued with, the religious leaders of his day. Those were the ones he had problems with. And Matthew 23 reminds us that he talked to them, and his problem was that they tried to keep people out of the kingdom of heaven. When I think about that, it reminds me of anytime I hear about or see denominational, regional leaders trying to look for that hotshot, charismatic, super apostle who's going to build them a mega church, while everybody else is sent to churches that are discarded as dying churches, right? But I've also seen it in my own ministry. Anytime a parishioner, a church member comes to me with some new idea, and I said, that's a great idea, but I think I have another idea, and let me tell you what I'm doing. And I see this look of disappointment and frustration on their faces. And I could see that face even as I'm still talking, and that internal monologue, stop talking, and I just couldn't help it. It just kept coming out. And afterwards, I was struggling with that to understand, well, what do I do with this? How do I lead when I know what I believe has to happen, but there's a conflict here? So I went back to school, and I've been trying to study leadership, and I've been reading book after book, and over the last, I think about 8-9 years, I've been discovering that there are people in the military and in the business world who are making amazing discoveries about the liberation of people. My wife, Catherine, she spoke a few years ago at Lead. She and I were having dinner in November. It was a romantic dinner. It was quiet. Everyone spoke in kind of hushed tones throughout the restaurant. And so we're eating dinner together, and we're having this lovely evening. And the single man, the host leads into the table right next to us. He seemed to be in his own world because he ate this little dish, and then he looked up at the waiter, and he said, this quiet restaurant. I think this is the best thing I've ever eaten. Wow! Could you bring me more of this? Catherine and I are cracking up. And he just kept going on and on. He was filled with this boisterous joy. And Catherine and I we're still in the hushed tone, just chatting with each other. We're like, we got to meet this guy. And so at some moment, we turned over and he said, well, hey, where are you from? We started this conversation. We learned that he's an entrepreneur. He'd start several businesses, and now he was taking the opportunity to teach others how to be entrepreneurs. And we were fascinated going back and forth, and I'll be honest with you, I can't remember exactly what he said that spurred this thought in my head, but he said something, and I responded, think about all the books I'd been reading, and I said, despite all the polarization, the conflicts, and the difficulties we're having in our country, I really do believe that we're on the precipice, a threshold of a new era. And I think that there's going to be more and more people who are free to be the best that they can be. I want to tell you his response. But I need to add, we never told him that we were pastors. We never even told him we were Christian or that we were religious. We're just talking about business. And so I made this comment, and he responded to me with this. Exactly. The churches and the moose lodges have failed in our society. And I really do believe that people are going to find their purpose in the business world. Shit. I had no retort. This random guy in a random restaurant in this random conversation, he labeled the problem of the church. And what's even worse, I don't hear any of us talking about it. Whenever I get on the denominational calls, the jurisdictional calls on the annual conference, nobody's talking about this. It was so clear to him, and we still seem to be struggling with it. Now, I've been spending years trying to study this, trying to understand it, trying to implement it. How do I try it out? And it's difficult and it's hard, but I've tried to keep this goal in front of me. And here's what I've learned. I think I finally come to a place where I can articulate it. Every time that I make a decision or solve a problem that could or should be addressed by somebody else in my church, I have taken power away from them. Every time I make a decision or solve a problem that could or should be addressed by somebody else, I've taken power away from them. And as I've made more and more decisions, I've weakened and weakened our organization. And so I've been working on how do I push those decisions out? How do I share the problems for other people to solve? And perhaps you're thinking to yourself, well, if we did that, if we're no longer making decisions, then why are we pastors? What is our responsibility? What are we supposed to do? And this is what I'd say. We have a great responsibility. Our responsibility is to create the culture and the structure and the environment. To create that space. To clarify our goals so that everyone understands what we're doing together. To keep people within the values and the boundaries of who we are. And to help people communicate and collaborate. To help us all have focus on a clear goal, to stay within our values and boundaries, and to communicate and collaborate together. I really believe that's what we need to do. And as we do that more and more, what we find is, we have to find our own power from Jesus Christ. We get that power from Jesus Christ. But as we allow other people to make decisions, other people to solve problems, they gain more and more power. They get some insight into a little bit of more of that puzzle of their purpose in life. who they were created to be. And that's even if they make mistakes. If they try and they fail, that helps to clarify their purpose. And as they clarify their purpose, they grow in leadership. Leaders, not as who's the leader and who's the follower, I'm the leader, you're the follower. No, not any of that. But a space where everyone can be a leader in their own right, not as I define it, not as I'm trying to make others into my image, but when we simply liberate the people to do what God has called them to do, then without discrimination, except discriminating against bad behavior. That's appropriate, right? We're going to discriminate against bad behavior to keep people within our values and boundaries. But as we liberate people, they become leaders in their own right, according to their own culture, according to their own experience, according to their own style, however they want to. They become leaders. And in this process, we liberate people. We emancipate people to be the very best that God has made them to be. And I believe that when we do that, that's how we transform the world. Amen.